Hello, I'm Caroline Davison, Managing Partner at Elvis.
And I'm Ben Essen, Global Chief Strategy Officer of Iris.
And we're here to talk about the missing measure in this week's effectiveness conversations, climate impact. So we have, of course, dubbed the topic Ecoeffectiveness.
So when we talk about marketing effectiveness, what measures come to mind? Revenue growth, market share, penetration, or maybe brand measures like salience, affinity, consideration, or service ones like NPS, lifetime value, or customer satisfaction, or simply profit and ROI. This list here represents the KPIs that have been reported and modelled across over 40 years of IPA effectiveness data. And it's the consistency of this reporting and analysis that has allowed our industry to develop an almost scientific understanding of how advertising drives growth, profit, and other key business outcomes. But in corporate boardrooms across the world, a new set of measures and targets are being talked about. ESGs, SDGs, net zero. You can hardly open a financial publication now without reading about the attention being paid to key measures of business health that go beyond the bottom line. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are being put at the heart of business strategy, and the Big Four consultancies and the World Economic Forum have just announced a major new set of environmental, societal, and governmental measures, ESGs, that they anticipate will drive decision-making in the financial markets. Because 21st century businesses face a new set of challenges, and the realization has now hit that to overcome them, they need a new set of metrics. And most prevalent of all has been the setting of ambitious science-based climate targets. Whether it's Google's commitment to remove carbon completely from their supply chain by 2030, or BP's pledge to fundamentally pivot their organization away from fossil fuels by 2050, all these currently high carbon companies and many more have committed to urgently decrease their emissions until they hit net zero. What does it mean to hit net zero? I'm just going to give you a bit of context. For the last century and more, society has burned fossil fuels to power economic growth. But as the blue and red lines here indicate, burning these fossil fuels has caused the quantity of CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions emitted into the atmosphere to rise in correlation. These greenhouse gases are cumulative and are now collected in the atmosphere, where they've already caused temperatures to rise 1 degree above pre-industrial levels. The regularity with which the world is experiencing severe heat waves, droughts, wildfires, hurricanes and floods is caused by this 1 degree increase. The science tells us that if any semblance of society as we know it is to survive, we need to limit this global temperature increase within 1.5 degrees. But if emissions continue climbing as they have been until now, we'll be emitting enough carbon to take us past 1.5 degrees in less than 8 years' time. So to avoid this scenario, we now need to follow the turquoise trend line and reduce the carbon emitted into the atmosphere year upon year. We have until 2030 to halve emissions, and by 2050 or sooner, we need to be at a point where no incremental greenhouse gases are emitted. This is net zero, and a business committing to a science-based net zero target is saying that they will reduce their organization's carbon impact in line with or ahead of this curve. So this creates an unprecedented new challenge for businesses. If profitability and emissions have always grown hand in hand, how to uncouple them? How to invert this correlation? Here's where effectiveness can help. As an industry, empowered by the IPA, we have invested in years of data and analysis to become experts in how advertising makes sales go up. We now need to do the same to develop the science of how advertising can make emissions go down. This is uncharted new territory and requires a new set of tools, new data, and a new measure of success, where the best charts go down, not up. The defining challenge for 21st century advertising then that will dominate the rest of our careers is this question: how to maintain or increase profitability while decreasing carbon emissions to zero. This is what we are calling eco-effectiveness, the missing measure that we believe needs to be a key element of all effectiveness cases going forward. Now, we're going to talk you through our work so far on the topic, but more than anything, this session is an invitation to join this movement. If we're to have any hope of turning this trend line around, we need to start making this missing measure visible in a transparent and consistent way. And in doing so, we need to take responsibility for the full impact of our work. So today we'll be sharing a methodology for this measurement that we would like to invite the industry to explore, to adapt, and to adopt. It has three core elements to it. The first step is simply to start reporting the carbon impact of our work. If our econometrics proves that advertising was responsible for incremental sales, then it means that advertising was also responsible for the associated emissions. We should accept this responsibility and start reporting the greenhouse gas uplift generated by our work. It may feel uncomfortable, but until we report these numbers, we can't improve them. The second step is to adopt a consistent methodology that allows these figures to be compared universally across different kinds of campaign and sector. And the third is to use this data to generate transferable, open source insights on the changes advertising can make to help reduce emissions to net zero.
So, to best illustrate how this framework might take shape, we wanted to start with the most recent IPA Effectiveness Award Grand Prix winner, as it sets the benchmark for effectiveness within the industry. The last winner was Aldi, whose Beauty and Brains campaign ran between 2015 and 2017 and resulted in a £1.78 billion of incremental revenue from advertising, equating to £2.07 profit for every pound spent, giving Aldi its highest ever return on advertising and giving advertising one of its most celebrated and successful case studies. So let's apply that new eco-effectiveness framework, starting with the first pillar, honest reporting of our impact. What uplift in greenhouse gas emissions is the Aldi campaign responsible for? What is its carbon impact? Well, we can use a simple equation to work this out. The uplift in sales, driven by advertising, multiplied by the carbon footprint per item sold, gives us the uplift in greenhouse gas emissions attributed to advertising. For Aldi to work out the uplift in sales, we can use the numbers submitted in the IPA award paper. We're given the sales volume increase and we're given the percentage of sales attributed to advertising, allowing us to work out the incremental sales to be 132,700 cars. Now that's a relatively easy part of the calculation. Working out the carbon footprint is a little bit more unfamiliar to us all. What we need to look at is the carbon life cycle assessment of a product, the LCA. That is the total emissions from extracting the raw materials for the product, its production, its distribution, its storage, its use by a consumer, and its disposal at the end of its life, the total life cycle. Now, the availability of these LCAs is steadily increasing. More brands and businesses are publishing them themselves, particularly as part of annual company reports and sustainability plans, and those are publicly available. And academics such as Mike Berners-Lee are plugging some of the other gaps of their modelling. Now, where LCAs do exist, there is still wide discrepancy in whether the data is held at a category level, a product level, or a brand level, depending on the item that you're looking at. So some LCA figures will be much more accurate than others. Fortunately for us, Aldi makes the LCA data on a selection of its models publicly available on its website, and we can use those to work out the carbon footprint for our calculation. Now, where exact model data wasn't available, we applied the LCA of the most similar model to it. So, for example, the data for the A3 and the A5 wasn't available, so we used the A4 as a proxy. Now, you can see in the table there that the Q models, which are SUVs, have a significantly higher LCA than A models. So exactly what models you're promoting has a huge impact. We took the model breakdown of incremental orders from one of the tables in the IPA paper, that's the colourful one at the top, and we attributed an LCA carbon figure to each. And then we worked out a weighted mean of 39 tonnes of carbon equivalent per car. Putting those two figures into our calculation, 132,700 cars times 39 tonnes of carbon equivalent per car means over 5.1 million tonnes of carbon dioxide will be attributable to the Aldi advertising that ran between 2015 and 2017. Let's just pause on that for a minute. 5.1 million tonnes. That's equivalent to 1.3 coal power stations running consistently for a year. It's more than the whole of Iceland generated in 2017. It's more than the annual emissions of Uganda, a country with a population of 43 million who are already suffering some of the worst impacts of climate change. It's a really big number, and it's a lot to get your head around, and it's always easy to try and dismiss it. So the client should change their product or the government should regulate. But we believe that this responsibility is on us. We created the work, we celebrate the work that sells. We need to step up and take responsibility for all of the consequences of this.
So as advertisers, This is very difficult to digest, but I think it is worth noting that this was the sum total of multiple campaigns promoting various products across a 3-year period, and it generated some £1.78 billion of revenue. So there are other big numbers involved. So how do we make the measure useful? How do we break it down? Is there a way that we can compare and contrast across large and small campaigns, across multiple years, and of course across diverse sectors? To do this, we're recommending the use of a single consistent measure called return on CO2. Because in ROI, we already have a proven methodology for consistently measuring effectiveness across diverse campaigns and sectors. With return on investment, we can show that for every pound spent, how much revenue and profit was returned. So with a finite budget, we can show how hard we made each pound work. The principle with emissions is the same. We just need to change the currency. So with return on CO2 or CO2 equivalent, the question becomes, for every ton of carbon emitted, how much revenue and profit can you return? Your carbon budget is even more finite than your fiscal one, as we know, so how hard can you make each ton work? And just to note, we've used revenue rather than profit in what we're about to show you, simply because it's more publicly available, but we would of course endorse the use of a profit metric as well. So looking back at Audi, we have another simple equation. The incremental revenue divided by the uplift in greenhouse gas emissions equals the revenue per tonne of CO2. In Audi's case, with incremental revenue of £1.78 billion and an uplift of 5,175,300 tonnes of CO2, the revenue per tonne of CO2 is £344. Okay, so this number doesn't mean much on its own, as we have no idea what good looks like. We need to know what kinds of returns we should be aiming for as we progress on the roadmap to net zero. Now, clearly we want the number to be as high as possible. We're trying to maximise the return on each tonne of CO2 or greenhouse gas. But the only way to achieve objective understanding of what a good return is for us to build up a database where we start reporting and tracking this measure across multiple sectors and multiple campaigns. And of course, that's where you come in. First and foremost, we urge you to start doing this, not least because with access to your own data, you're able to do this with far more accuracy. Really, every time we publish an ROI, we need a return on CO2 as well. But to get us started, we've applied the model to 2 other IPA winners from 2018 in very different categories. IKEA's 3-year Wonderful Everyday campaign and a smaller but highly effective social media program from our clients, Starbucks. Unlike Audi, the life cycle assessment data isn't publicly available for these brands at a product level, but even without it, we're able to get some understanding of the climate impact involved. So for IKEA, we could use their annual sustainability report to calculate that 650,000 tonnes of CO2 were emitted to drive £755 million of revenue, which equates to a return of £1,161 per tonne of CO2 equivalent emitted. For Starbucks, we calculated that 12 million cups of coffee were sold, an average of 552 grams of carbon per cup, meaning that 8,076 tonnes of carbon were emitted to produce £28.1 million in revenue. And that return is nearly £3,500 per tonne of CO2. It might seem surprising how much higher these returns are, but actually if you look at the data out there on consumer activity, you see that car ownership is the second most carbon intensive activity after flying. And you see this similar discrepancies between different categories. Obviously, that's one thing to note. The other thing we really need to start looking at is within each category, what are the achievements and what are the shifts that you can make like for like. So those are the first 2 pieces of the jigsaw. The third part of the framework focuses on ensuring we can collectively develop open source, transferable insights and lessons in how to meaningfully progress towards net zero as quickly as possible. What can we do in the day-to-day of our work to shift the way that advertising and marketing is creating an impact? We've clustered the potential levers into 3 core areas: switching the product, creating carbon-free value, and encouraging sustainable behaviours. The idea is we collectively optimise and build on these, as well as identifying others.
Switching the product is all about consciously deciding which products you should be promoting based on carbon impact, and questioning whether you should be promoting some products at all. The reality is that at the moment, very few products are anywhere near carbon zero, but some are obviously far, far worse than others. The main options for change involve promoting circular economy products, so that's reusing products and materials already in existence as opposed to creating any new ones, lower carbon alternatives, or higher quality items that last for longer. For Aldi, circular economy thinking could mean promoting used cars over new cars, as due to the embedded emissions in a car, the general consensus is it's much better to keep the old cars in circulation for as long as it's reliable, unless you are doing high mileage or the fuel consumption is really poor. Another option would be to dial up longer-lasting quality messaging to encourage far longer between purchases so owners get more out of the carbon invested. Or Aldi could choose to promote their lower carbon alternative, the e-tron electric vehicle, over the petrol range. Electric cars have a carbon impact which is about half of that of petrol cars, so that would mean switching the product in the Aldi ads to the e-tron would double the return on carbon, from £344 per tonne to £688. So seeing as Aldi have already looked to switch some of their ads to the e-tron, such as their Super Bowl ad this year, perhaps they're already starting to think this way.
The second area is to use marketing and advertising to create additional value through means that don't create additional emissions. Unleashing advertising's great power to encourage people to pay more without the need to sell more, instead creating intangible or service-based value that goes beyond the product. The purest form of value advertising can create is intangible brand value. We increase perceptions of what something is worth. The value exists purely in the head. The Audi case is a great example of this, significantly increasing the average selling price per vehicle simply by making the brand appear more exciting, desirable, and premium. The second area is to promote value-add services that go beyond the product. Again, in Audi's case, by promoting after-sales and finance packages, average customer value increased by 6% without incremental emissions. The third lever does have a product and a carbon element, but it involves upselling customers to low-carbon premium features. In the Audi case, upselling customers to the technology pack increased purchase price by up to 45%, while encouraging more efficient driving as well. But conversely, upselling customers to features including sports mode, quattro, or even an inbuilt fridge did the opposite, disproportionately increasing the emissions per sale.
The last of these three levers is encouraging positive behaviour, particularly apt for this day of the conference. To reduce the carbon impact of advertising, we should be consciously depicting responsible product usage behaviour, we should be normalising low-impact decisions as a social norm, and we should be raising awareness and understanding of new behaviours that will make a difference. So let's look at a few clips from clowns and talk about how they could evolve with this in mind. In this first clip, rather than leaving the number of people in the car to the imagination, Aldi could show it full of passengers, endorsing the importance of car sharing. In this next clip, rather than inferring public transport is the wrong choice, they could take the opportunity to normalise and applaud those making these low-impact decisions. And in the final clip, which heroes new safety features on the display panel, it's easy to imagine how the eco function could also be weaved into the narrative. Other ads such as Birth, which plays off the revving of a car, unfortunately a very easy way to waste fuel, might need a little bit more of a radical rethink.
So, with these 9 levers in place and weighted for impact, we can use the IPA data to develop a score against each of them. I need to thank the Iris data team here for repointing their proprietary effectiveness model and helping us visualize these levers and identify where the greatest headroom for improvement exists. Width is the weighting, depth is the score, and we can immediately see that there is headroom to make significant improvements and the areas where this headroom most exists. We believe that when used in combination, these levers we've just talked about can make a big impact. However, we should also acknowledge that many of these changes that we're suggesting here are incremental. And given the seriousness of the topic, it would be remiss of us not to remind you of the IPCC's message that reducing emissions at required rate will require rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented change in all aspects of society. So in Audi's case, what would unprecedented change look like? Well, a new report, Upselling Smoke, suggests that to stem the growth in demand for ever bigger SUVs, all new cars that emit over 160 tonnes of CO2 per kilometre should be treated like cigarettes and face an advertising ban. Whether or not you believe the approach that saved our lungs can also save our planet, it's our responsibility as an industry to discuss what kinds of work we should be awarding, or even creating. We need to decide what is our threshold of acceptability, And when we have, we then need to take responsibility for that decision.
So, to conclude, if net zero is a key business target, then emissions is a key effectiveness measure. Reducing emissions whilst maintaining profitability is a challenge that requires all of our very best minds. To build knowledge, we need to report the data, even when it's uncomfortable. And to achieve net zero, every country, every company, and every citizen on this planet needs to play their part. This is a bigger than self problem that we need to collaborate on if we're to solve it. That's why Ben and I, as members of the Purpose Disruptors community and the Great Reset Initiative, have begun this work. But we invite you, marketeers, econometricians, to join us and to contribute to its progress, because we urgently need you and your data. Please get in touch by email or through the IPA and let us know your thoughts and how you personally might be able to contribute. We're going to finish with some words from the Purpose Disruptors community about why now is the time for the Great Reset. Thank you.
We have the power to capture imaginations and influence how the world behaves. But we've used that power without thinking about its effect. Until we paused and reconsidered what was essential. And for a moment, we only made what the world truly needed. We now have an opportunity to use our influence for society and the planet's best interests. Because right there in front of us is a great, big, blank page. Our chance to use our creativity to reimagine, to question what we influence, to reset the way we live. So pick up your pens, your mouse, your camera, write, play, perform, or whatever you do, and join the Great Reset.